People are always asking, is this person in front of me the same on the inside as he or she or they appears to be on the outside? Is there congruence between what's within that person and the words and actions I'm viewing and hearing externally? Children ask that about their parents. Students ask it about their teachers. Parishioners ask it about their pastors and priests. Employees ask it about their bosses. And in a democracy, citizens ask it about their political leaders. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life. It means congruence between our inner and our outer life. That's a quote by Parker Palmer from his book, A Hidden Wholeness, and frames very nicely today's conversation with Dan Doty, who's the co-founder of EVRYMAN and a coach, wilderness retreat facilitator, working with men, helping them come into a healthy and right relationship with their emotions, to help them cohere and come into a real integrity with their inner lives as a way of also creating social coherence in our communities. And so in this conversation, we explore what it really means to reclaim our emotions and to live in integrity with our inner and outer lives. And not only supporting men in their path of healing, or those who identify as male in their path of healing and renewal, but what does this look like as we as a culture come into community congruence? Dan has spent many years stewarding a more integrated masculinity, and we touch on the cultural forces at play and how we might balance both compassion and courage in owning the work that we must do as men in this time, and also having compassion and not allowing the weight of the Me Too movement and such to really, in a sense, pull us into a greater reactivity. So how can we own and really be in relationship with our privilege and own what's there? At the same time, with compassion, allow ourselves to soften into the grief beneath the surface, to animate a really congruent style of decolonizing our own minds. And so we'll also note that we spend a little bit of time, I suppose, defining terms, what we mean by men, what we mean by masculinity, femininity. And of course, this conversation is in no way an answer, or are we trying to construct just another truth or another idea of what it means to be a man, but we are sitting into questions that we feel are really important to be sitting with in this time. Again, not only as people who identify as men, but also as a culture that lives in, we could say, a hypermasculine culture or hypermasculinity. And so in some senses, we are all fish swimming in the same pond, and therefore culture, shows up and manifests through us in many ways. And so how can we decolonize this way of being with our emotions in our inner lives in all of us? And so I suppose I also just want to open by inviting any feedback or suggestions. I note and am really excited by having conversations that are a little bit edgy, a little bit provocative, and really push the envelope a little, which does require a tenderness and a real openness. And so please know this is an open inquiry, and I hope it's a conversation starter, and that both Dan and I are really open to any feedback or comments on any topics that are explored today. It's a very juicy one. It's a very alive one. And I look forward to hearing how it sits with you. Enjoy. Grab a tea, take a breath, notice the inhale, the exhale, and the space between. A moment in between moments. Here you are. You're listening to Spaces Between with your friend and host, Al Jeffrey. An open exploration into restoring connection in the 21st century in our personal lives, our relations, and our communities. What does it mean to live in relationship to the wholeness of who we are together? I'm not one for ads and am one for creating something beautiful with others, in this case, you. So if you enjoy our time together, I do invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate and leave a review for the show. And if you're feeling super generous and fueled and filled up by our conversations, you might even consider donating or soon joining my Patreon membership. Just visit www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com, where you'll also find show notes and other useful links and resources following these conversations. So this is it. Let's dive in. Brilliant. Dan, thanks so much for joining for a conversation on the show.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah. Before we dive into any kind of content, I was wondering if you'd feel to check in. And I know you check in at EVRYMAN, and if you'd be willing to share a little about the check-in process, and then we can go ahead and check in.
Yeah, totally. So the check-in is our simplest and most basic practice that we do in our groups, we do in our retreats, and it is an awareness tool that helps us begin to speak from our moment by moment experience by naming what is happening in our body, in our somatic process, and what's happening emotionally. And the reason we do that is that when we come from those places, those parts of ourselves, it clicks on an immediate and powerful, call it emotional Wi-Fi or human connectivity. It's like clicking on the on switch to how we can actually be present with each other. So I'll model quickly. Dan checking in. My body feels calm and strong, and my feet are a little cold. My back's a little sore emotionally. I guess to be all the way honest, I am tired. I am ready for bed. I'm not a night person, and when the sun goes down, so do I. I am harried, I guess would be the right word. Not very settled mentally. I just had a 9-10 hour workday, and then 3 hours of straight cooking, cleaning, and child putting to bed, and then realized I was a little late for this, and then sat down. So I'm feeling a little edgy and a little, I guess, just a little annoyed. And I'm here and I'm in.
And I'm Al, checking in. I am physically, feeling tight in the glutes, cold in the toes as well, a little bit tight around the shoulders and the tops. Eyes still kind of acclimatizing to being open for the day. Opposite end of the day for me. Emotionally, I'm feeling also a little rushed, and hearing that, feeling very grateful as well. And also really curious about what might unfold. I'm here and I'm checking in.
Cool.
So thanks for sharing. And I suppose opportunity for those listening in as well to maybe take a moment to check in for yourself.
Yeah, and if that's the case, the whole point here of that process is to start to allow for an alignment between your inner state and your outer presentation, right? Because whether we're aware of it or not, we can generally tell when somebody, if their words or what they're putting out to the world is not congruent with what they actually feel inside. And so, I could have said some bullshit check-in about, trying to make nice, but, probably could have heard it in my voice. And I certainly wouldn't have been happy with lack of transparency there. So that's kind of the point, is really to find that congruency between the inner and the outer.
Yeah. And I suppose in that sense, then it really allows for a social coherence as well, an authentic, integral social coherence. When we show up really in congruence with our inner and outer worlds, we allow our real selves to actually be seen, and then therefore to be met in the social spaces we're in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when somebody's being straight up like that, you know where they're at. Otherwise, there's some sort of like invisible sleuth game going on of like, where's this person actually? What are they actually, feeling?
Yeah. And there's nothing worse than being in a space where everyone's trying to impress each other. It's just not. It's not conducive to
who realism. You are, I suppose. I mean, depends on. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, true.
Some people like that a lot.
Yeah. The games, social games. So I'm curious, as a way of just building context for the conversation, and for those who may not be familiar with yourself and your work, just anything that feels significant in your journey to being in relationship to your own emotions as a man in our culture and time. Yeah, I'm curious if you could share anything that does feel significant in that path for you.
Yeah, well, I would just say that my baseline was being wildly out of contact with my emotions, completely out of contact. I was raised in a family and a culture that was, I haven't, I'm trying not to be dramatic about this when I say it, but I haven't found many more repressed little cells of humans anywhere. And it was just not, it just didn't happen. We just didn't have feelings. We didn't express them. We didn't allow ourselves to acknowledge pain that we were feeling. We didn't allow ourselves to really acknowledge too much joy. It was a very, very tight, repressed way of living. And that wasn't very cool for me, in the long run. I was also just a pretty sensitive guy overall. And I mean that in a lot of ways, but energetically speaking and interpersonally speaking. And I can feel a bit of an empath, I guess you could say, maybe more than a bit. And so the gap between what was spoken and what was actually being felt was really wild. So you can see like that check-in practice is a pretty clear antidote to that way of life. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part, right? I mean, I got 40 hours of stories I could tell you about other things too, but that's definitely a huge part of it. I'm still, at 38, I'm still uncovering the truth of my childhood and my family life in pretty remarkable ways.
Hmm. Yeah, and I suppose that's something that I'd just like to note early on in our conversation for those listening as well, is that for myself in kind of the space of healing masculinity or men's work, or however we'd like to frame it, especially for myself as someone who identifies as male and also queer, that there can tend to be this idea that there is a right way to be a man now, and that we've actually got it wrong. And yes, it's not our fault. We're like fish in a sea, and we swim in culture and breathe it in. But that there's also almost this right way to be a man now. And so just to note early on that...
Is there, I'm actually curious, what's the right way now?
Well, in some circles, and I won't name circles, but my sense, and I mean, I'm curious about your experience of this as well, but I mean, I'm personally very much value emotional vulnerability and really connecting to the space beneath the shoulders, having that be a very real part of my expression and my experience of others in the world. And also I'm curious for those who do identify as men, but maybe are just wired in a slightly different way and they have their own way of being emotionally vulnerable, that there is sometimes this propensity for it to place too much emphasis on sharing vulnerability to the extent where it can still come across almost sometimes in this kind of masturbatory vulnerability.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which for me is just like...
It gets stinky. Ugh. I mean, anything gets stinky when it gets pushed a little too far.
Yeah. Yeah. But I suppose I just want to note before we dive into any kind of conversations that this really is an inquiry and a living inquiry, and that, we're not... Like it's a lifelong path of integrating the parts and finding our way of being in relationship to emotion and the inner realm. And so for anyone listening who maybe is just kind of on the tip of starting to come to turn inwards a little bit, then I suppose I just want to note that this is, that itself is a courageous act. And we're on the way. So I'm curious for you, what was that moment where you realized, like maybe the first moment where you started to realize, wow, I have been maybe out of congruence with my inner world, and that pulled you to maybe start to inquire a little?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty big one. I was living in New York City. I was 27 or 28, and I was a high school teacher. I was part of a program where I was getting a master's degree in return for a couple of years teaching in the inner city. And I was, I'll just say it, I was fucked up. I was burnt out. I was not okay. I went from living basically in the wilderness, guiding wilderness programs for 5.5, 6 years, moved to the city, was out of my element. It was incredibly stressful. But the more important thing was that I was in a long-term relationship that I didn't have the courage to get honest with. I didn't have the tools or the courage to get honest with myself. And I ended up cheating on my partner in a very shameful way and multiple times. And I, through the course of, going down into a deeper hole, I kind of imploded. I did implode. I blew up that relationship. And in that, I literally blew up my conception of myself. Like, I was a very loving, good-hearted person, and I found myself doing things I could never imagine doing. And, I really had a downslide, and that prompted me to take some pretty drastic action. And as part of that, I mean, there's a lot of things I did, but as part of that, I found my first men's group, which was deeply, deeply impactful. But that didn't even do it. That even didn't get me there either. I think so. I was in a men's group in New York City for a while, and I had let's just say I had a total year of complete breakdown. And at the end of that, I moved out west, United States, to Montana, and I kind of lived in a little cabin and put myself back together, and found another men's group out there just through a flyer in a coffee shop. And through that, met my co-founder, friend, and mentor, Owen Marcus, who had spent the last 35 years of his life learning and healing from a deeply emotional and somatic place. And so it was in his group, in a men's group in a tiny town in Idaho, that I got confronted for the first time and asked the simple question of, what are you feeling? And I went completely blank. I remember being in such a state of wild freeze and not knowing when I got asked that. And it was really there that I started to gain some sense of the massive amount of disconnection that I had between my actual truth and how I was living. So it was pretty wild.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing. It's amazing, the power of questions to unlock, authentic questions where you can really feel someone's presence is willing to hold whatever might come back after asking it. And I can just feel myself, as you're sharing that, feel myself there receiving that question for the first time, but receiving it from someone who's just so willing to sit there in silence until you feel the question deeply enough yourself. Yeah. And I suppose I'm curious, what is it that, we've spoken about childhood and our own experiences of being modeled, what's okay, what's normal in terms of emoting and sharing and letting others in. I'm curious why we are in this, why you sense we are in this place at this time where, and it's not only maybe men, but we have this culture that is maybe hyper masculine, and there is this prizing of intellect and cognition. And we speak about kind of the Cartesian dualism and the split. Just curious if you could share a little about your perspective of why we are here now.
My first thought is that it worked in a sense, right? The level of, technological sophistication and just organization of our world, like we have, I guess we could go way philosophical here, but I think from a pragmatic stance, people started living further away from the earth, further away from each other. And, in some sense, it propagated, the species to grow where it is. I think in shorter term, like more recent things, I feel like actually, I don't have a clear answer for this, but here's what I do know. Life is hard. Surviving as an individual, as a family, as a culture, as a species is far more painful than I think any of us really want to admit a lot of times. And, I'll just think about my own life, when just so much surviving going on from every level. Like when you come across someone or you come across a family where they've had a generation or multiple generations of people just simply being okay, just simply being above the water and having the space to allow for love to flow and for nourishment to flow. And it's really rare. It's really rare. It's not the norm, And I don't know, you can take that back into history as far as I want. Who knows, man? But I just think that the amount of energy it takes to pop through the survival barrier and the the clinging of past trauma in this lifetime and parents' lifetime and on. It is a remarkable amount of care, skill, and effort that it takes to heal to a place of being, first of all, okay, and then to be an agent of real goodness. And I think that's there's a lot of people, and who knows, I'm probably one of them, who's really intending to do good and really intending to do the right thing. And, that doesn't even always work out either. So a lot of fucking people trying real hard. And I just think it's really, really, really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that stance. It really, I suppose, calls for compassion. I mean, if you ask that to many people, and in my experience, and just in this kind of meta-modern, the circles where we are really trying to shift culture and consciousness to a more regenerative one, the first response would be maybe to poo-poo culture and to blame it on these shit narratives that we're running, but to actually note that actually it worked for a time. Maybe it's had its time, and maybe long ago, and we just haven't been able to shift it. And that's what we're doing. But to note, actually, it did work for a time, and it wasn't built intentionally, possibly, and this is a view, but it wasn't built intentionally against anybody. And so we can have compassion for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, on an individual level, if somebody is off base, and I used to work with different violent offenders of different types, and I learned this early on, that the ones who were the most, who caused the most harm, were clearly harmed more than anyone else. And that set a course of, we have to meet people where they are. And I do think you could extrapolate that out to society in a sense too. And it doesn't mean that you excuse it. It doesn't mean that you don't hold responsibility where it's due. But otherwise, man, it's one of the things, not to jump ahead here, but it's one of the reasons I feel that EVRYMAN has resonated. And it was my intention from day one, is that, pointing fingers and just saying, you're bad and we need you to be different. I get it. I get where that's coming from, but does it work? When does that actually work? Ever?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. In a sense, it's giving our power away just even more, in my experience. But I love I forget who said it, some wise person, but the child who didn't feel welcomed by the village will burn the village down simply to feel the warmth of the fire, which I just love. And yeah, it speaks on an individual level. And within us, like the exile within that also didn't feel included in our being in the world, will also burn the village down. But yeah, I suppose we can also think about it culturally and as a collective. Yeah. So it's the terms masculine and feminine thrown around a lot, and obviously they're useful in some senses, and also many feel they're absolutely useless because they still don't actually touch the point. And so just as a matter of kind of defining terms, I'm curious, how do you relate to both of those and what they mean for you or not?
Yeah, I've made a clear point to not really engage with those terms for the most part. I'll get suckered into talking about it on podcasts and stuff, and here we go. I feel multiple ways. I feel like when I'm looking at from a moment in time societally right now, I think they're more complicated than they're worth at this point. I don't think they're that helpful. I feel like what we could do is take either one of those and then get really fucking critical and talk about what we're actually meaning. What are we actually saying? We could break masculine into, I don't know, a dozen or 100 different descriptive words. And then why don't we just use those instead? Because I do think that it's just not, there is no way to get, as far as I can tell, for most guys, 9 out of 10 guys, if you call something masculine, there is an innate gripping to it. You can't it just can't get away from it. And unfortunately, the opposite is true too. Like if you call something feminine, most guys still, there's a lot that aren't this way now, right? But there's still a giant bias that's going to say it's going to push that away. And that's not helpful. It's just not helpful. That's my feeling. However, if we're having a conversation that's slightly more esoteric and we're talking more about, energetic or yogic principles or, things of that nature, I still tend to not prefer to use those terms. However, there are conversations where I don't mind using that as the label. I don't really care, honestly. But when I'm talking about like the bigger picture of healing society and moving forward, don't like to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I resonate with that as well. It's basically first principles thinking. Let's break them down into the virtues, the qualities, the characteristics of what we mean by each term. And fundamentally, they're human. The integrity, courage, sensitivity, listening, we could go ahead and put them in their little segments. But fundamentally, for me, that's what a whole integrated way of being in the world kind of feels and looks like. And so let's use first principles.
Yeah, it's a funny story. So when I was living in the Bronx and teaching, I had the principal of my school. And I was young, and I was like working through all this on my own. Every day I'd show up to work and he'd be like, Dan, you're such a man. You're just such a man. And it just grated me and rubbed me the wrong way. And, at that time I was like, do you not actually see me? Do you not see how much love I bring like to the table here? Don't you see that I'm teaching my class with just kindness? But I mean, he wasn't wrong either. Like in the societal norms, like, yeah, I can't, like, I was put into a body here and even in some senses a mindset, either learned or what inherited, pretty classically modern man, right? And so that's this interesting place I feel that I've got to live and explore and share is I think we get to be, what I get most excited about is that we get to be all kinds of parts, right? We get to play the whole spectrum, and that's where it's at for me.
Yeah. I was reflecting yesterday on my journey into, I'd say into my manhood and into my queerness, and they feel one and the same, which has me in this question at the moment of like, what is the difference between integrated masculinity and queerness? Like being able to live in a kind of kaleidoscopic perspective. And for me, it was living in Boulder, Colorado and going to 5 Rhythms every Sunday with Melissa. And for the first time felt how much I loved being in my body and the sensuality of being in my body and enjoying all of its corners and crevices. And when I started enjoying that, the first kind of narratives, this was before I actually thought that it would be okay if maybe I was queer. But before that, enjoying my body was like, oh shit, you can't do this because this is gay or this is queer, and I didn't identify in that way at all. So it was scary. And I was like, fuck it, I enjoy it. So if I enjoy it, does that mean then that I am queer? Cool, I'll hold that label if it helps me in the first instance feel okay to actually embody these qualities that I enjoy. But it has me really, I was going to say queer, really curious. And I do see a link between those two things, but really curious at the moment around what is the link between queerness as a way of being, not just an orientation, queerness being a curiosity, an openness, a receptivity, and integrated masculinity. Like what's... Yeah.
Well, here's my sort of caveman perspective is that I am angling for a inside out approach that values descriptive truth above any kind of prescriptive truth that could ever be made. I feel like to prescribe any outside terminology or category upon any dynamic human individual at some point is going to wear thin, at some point is going to break down, depending on our orientation to life, whether we are going to continue changing and growing and expanding, or whether we're going to commit to an identity. So my spiritual practice, which is a Tibetan Vajrayana meditation practice, is completely oriented toward continually diving through any reference point and through any description. And so from that point of view, I feel like there's this beautiful, elegant simplicity of self-description of my truth, and that in my truth, as I can, and that's not a static thing either, right? Like our truth changes, but whether it's integrated masculinity or whether it's masculinity in general or whether it's queerness, or I guess I don't purport to understand it all, other than I think for me, there's a lot less trouble if I guess like authenticity and willing to be and feel and express our transparent experience in the moment. I mean, we're getting a little fine tuned here, a little subtle on that, right? But the descriptive point of view is where I feel like we can find each other very, very, very firmly and very all the way. I feel like we can meet each other from that point, regardless of what the differences are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's great hearing. I'm curious to hear more about your Zen practice and how it has and continues to influence your work through EVRYMAN as well. Just that notion around, I suppose my practice is much more Vipassana in a sense. And so really contacting direct experience, which is also very much a more descriptive rather than prescriptive way of being in the world, which for me has always felt like I still don't really put a label around myself at all. For me, a label without a timestamp, like to say I'm queer full stop, is just incredibly limiting, because then unbeknownst to me, there'll be parts of myself that go out trying to constantly prove and reaffirm that identity. Yeah. But to say I'm queer in this moment, and for me that means open to curiosity, willing to question my own identity at every turn and every corner, it feels more livable as well. Can actually be in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, in no way am I saying there's probably any practical way to do away with categories, and it's important. But when it comes to the ability to truly see each other, to truly feel each other, to truly be with each other, that stuff tends to fall away. But however, it does, each one of those potential labels, differences, experiences can be, when offered vulnerably, the doorway through which to walk to meet each other. Like that's it's really amazing. It's it's part of the practice at EVRYMAN for sure, and it's part of my spiritual practice too. But it's that if we're willing to set up a space in which we can take risks, be vulnerable, share the full truth, the results of which are, mind-bending, heart exploding, and very connective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a sense, it's, direct experience. We're touching into these common pool of human emotions and experience. We all experience them in our own personal manifestations of them. And I suppose this is maybe a more Jungian approach, but that we all are having our own individual experience of a common set of human or existential dilemmas that we're all swimming in. And so when we start to touch on those more directly, we not only emancipate ourselves from their grasp, but we give each other permission. Like, let's sit in that together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm wondering what some of the ways are that you support men through, I suppose, coming back to being in a relationship with their emotions. Familiar with the rock method. And I'm wondering if you would share a little bit about that, or any other methods that you feel might be, practically useful for those listening in as well.
Yeah. So the rock formula is very simple and very elegant, and it's ROC. So it's relax, open, and connect. And it's a simple, practice, or I guess you could call it a protocol, that in the context of relation. Imagine one of our EVRYMAN groups and a handful of guys showing up together. The relax part, I actually think is more clearly stated in slow down. When we are looking to feel our truth, when we are looking to connect with others, the speed at which we are thinking, talking, and moving in general life is just far too fast. It's just not there. And in some sense, I think it could just be the R formula. Like, it's probably, it's the hardest step to actually do. And when you do slow down, like actually slow down with each other, the second part, O, which is open, and that means open to your experience. I think in plain language, it just means feel what's happening, feel your body, feel your emotion, be open to, the moment. And that's not just you. It could be inside of you and outside of you, but it's basically, if we're walking around, with our guard up, it's letting that guard down and letting ourselves actually be awake and alive and impacted by the world. And then the C, so C is connect. So we got relax, open, and connect. And connect is making the choice to reach out or to be impacted by someone else. And so that's in our practice, it's I slowed down, I get in touch with what I feel. The connect is, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be as vulnerable as possible. I'm going to, take an action or a step or even just an intention to make connection, to make contact. And so that simple formula is, it's like when really enacted, when embodied, it brings, it's just a state shift. It's a shift into a connected place. It's a shift into a very deeply human place where I believe some of our, deepest valuable human wiring, it just clicks on. It clicks on, and, it provides the safety for conflict. It provides the safety for difference. It provides an opportunity to learn how to operate and think and speak and act and touch in less of the sort of prefrontal cortex, judgmental, analytic, thing. It's just this more primordial way of being with each other, and it's usable in a deeply therapeutic group, but it's also usable, if somebody cuts you off or your partner steps on your toe or whatever, right? It's a very helpful tool.
Yeah. And some ways of, I suppose, the relax piece being, for me, what is such a radical act in this culture as well, especially during this time where it feels, there's this sense of urgency. And there are, like the climate catastrophe, there is a real sense of, fuck, we should have done something yesterday. But at the same time, I feel like it's such a paradox because the root, like the radical of the challenge is quite beneath behavior and therefore requires a real contemplative, kind of slow approach to actually reach those layers if we're actually going to do something that's useful. And so it's like, fuck, we're in a state of emergency and the human genome and body says, cool, like move faster, move quicker, do more. But actually the opposite is necessary. Yeah. Is there anything that you speak to or just in your own practice have found as useful to remind yourself that it's okay to actually slow down, like take pause?
I mean, at this point for me in my life, it's less about needing the reminder and it's more about life forcing it upon me. At this point, if I do not slow down, if I do not create space, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. My family's not okay. My business isn't okay. It's not functional to go at that frantic pace anymore. I have hurt myself and hurt others too much by it, and it just got to a point where it just doesn't function. I mean, am I doing it all the time? Fuck no, right? But it can feel the pain and the destruction by not doing it. And I think, I work as a coach also and work with individuals and teams too. And I feel like I've been doing this for a long time, right? I've been doing this practice for a long time, but a lot of people that I work with and that I know can start to find a general sense or an intuitive sense that a disembodied and sort of falling forward way of life, most people can sense that that's not really, the fruitful path. and it's hard, right? So the first step is just to like catch when you're out of control, catch when you're moving too fast, catch when you're not paying attention, catch, and these are places that, relationships, and we get feedback. I think we all get feedback pretty constantly about when we're present and not present, but we just need to catch it first. Notice it.
Yeah. Having the attunement to actually notice, which is a funny, again, because it requires the more that you sit in that space of reflection, the more you build the capacity for attunement, the more you can notice when you need to sit.
Yeah.
Which is a funny, I don't know, for me, I put my meditation cushion right in the middle of my bedroom. And most people who would come over like, why the fuck do you put it there?
Mine's right there.
Why the fuck do you put it there? You trip over it all the time. It's like, that's the point. If I trip over it, I know I'm not paying attention. I should probably sit on it. So just little things like knowing that, of course, I'm going to slip up and I'm going to forget everything that I stand for. But if I can like environmentally cue behavior or little anchors, it's like my future self, the elder of the future will thank me. Yeah, I'm curious about, the Me Too movement, and as a man, let alone maybe a white man, it can feel, heavy to even walk around, to say something. And I'm curious how you, in your own life again, or just in conversations with others, how you balance the recognition that, like the collective we, as maybe white men or the patriarchy more generally, there is stuff that we, maybe not me specifically, but we can work on and would like to work on. It lives in me. And also, though, for me to carry a kind of blame or shame around it so fully might push me into behaving in such a way that may, in a sense, stop me from really doing what's needed to come out in a vulnerable sense. I'll end up in defense again. So I'm curious how you balance that kind of self-compassion and also the courage and ownership over, that culture does live in me.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like the ownership piece is pretty, actually both pieces are very straightforward for me. So I'm married to a very, very, very deeply spiritual and powerful woman who has, I would say, kindly and, patiently helped me unearth layer after layer of sort of that embedded way of being, and it's a long journey. It's a big struggle, right? There's a lot there. I mean, I'm sure there's far more that I still have no clue, but I don't feel any shame or blame. And I haven't. And I don't think I ever have. I was a kid. I knew how good we had it. I did. I grew up in a little rural town, and we weren't wealthy, but we had enough. And I remember, it was like the late 90s. It was the 90s, and, America in the 90s at the time, like it was after the Gulf War. And I don't know, I had this sort of sense of that our place on the planet was about as good as anyone had ever had it. And I made that I think that for whatever reason, like kind of carried through my life. And, I've taken a bodhisattva vow a handful of years back, and I've all the way given, myself over to service and to love. And I'm up for it. I'm up for the challenge. I'm up for stepping up as a white male with all the privilege that, one could ever have imagined. And at the same time, recognizing that I feel like that can be a blocker, right? And maybe you alluded to this, but many, many men have come to me that I've worked with and said, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, but I have it so good. And I can't let myself, like, how am I to hurt? And that's not the right way. That's not the right path. That's not the right way forward. it's both. It's paradoxical. It's completely paradoxical all the way. Like the privilege is 100% real. And in terms of an individual life, I think like compassion cannot have boundaries. there's no way, like for real, real compassion doesn't choose, it sees through underdogs, top dogs, all of the dogs, right? Like, and so it's got to be both. And it's a lot to wrap your head around. It's a lot to wrap your head around the historical reality, the current reality, and the fact that we're all really fucking broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What comes up for me there is the piece around, who am I to hurt? Still being a kind of cognitive, trying to rationalize our way out of the hurt rather than actually, I fucking hurt. And when you take hurt far enough back, or frustration or anger, you usually end in a kind of sadness or grief. And from that place, like an action will emerge, which is compassionate and wise, most usually. But to rationalize our way out of hurt, which for most people is seen as being of service, like it's to honor privilege, is to privilege other people's hurt over mine, or other people's suffering over mine. It's like, no, actually that's not what we need. Yeah. Like the turning towards, a courageous approach of actually feeling all that's here. So I love that. I suppose as a way of starting to close and to bring in some more practical pieces, how can we, I suppose I'll ask two questions. One, just for men or male identifying people, how can we as men be better brothers to each other in service of the greater whole in this time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first step is to, I frame leadership as is going first and doing the hard thing, first, and leading by example in all of the ways possible, leading by example with vulnerability and being honest and real. And, that's I guess, what's coming up, the word that's really ringing for me in this whole conversation is compassion. That's actually not a word I usually use a lot in these contexts, but it is. I feel like it's both. So I guess it's paradoxical. I feel like we can and need to hold each other accountable. We can and need to speak up to each other, and we also have to really consider how to speak in ways that people can hear, how to speak in ways that other men can hear, and again, meet each other where we're at, and be bold. There's an example. Here's a really great example. I have a very dear friend named Ethan Kerr, who I was in a men's group in New York with him for many years, and we've remained very close. And since I knew him, he was banging the drum every single fucking day about whiteness, about privilege, and I knew he was right, but I was also just like, for a long time, I was confused. I'm like, I'm working on this vulnerability thing, man. Like, we're working on this like emotions thing. That's my thing. And he kept bombarding me. And he was right. He was all the way right. And he just never backed down. And he's doing incredible work. And that was him being an incredibly good human and an incredibly good brother, and he did it, and he stuck with me, and he stuck with everybody else. And he didn't, he just stayed on his truth the whole time, It's a great example of being an incredible brother, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The courage to really not call each other out, call each other in, really see each other in see the potential and the beauty, the gift, the courage in each other, and just hold that like steadfast.
Yeah, exactly.
With lightness. Yeah. And then, I suppose my second part of the question, which is, I suppose, to take it beyond just the binary of men and women, is how can we as a culture in this time heal, and maybe it's the same answer, but heal the kind of fragmented masculinity within all of us because we swim in this culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the same answer probably holds, but to expand out a little bit, one of the projects that I've been engaged in is this incredible, my sister, she's not really my, biological sister, but Cherie Healy and I are creating a project called The Reunion, which is a community and a kind of an ethos that really just gives all people, all genders, all sexualities, all backgrounds, all ages, everybody, a simple set of tools to come together and to be able to create the safety necessary for truth and connection to happen. And I think that there's a lot that happens we can heal each other incredibly. We can unendingly, seemingly, it seems to be unending. Like when we put ourselves in those scenarios and allow ourselves to truly see and hear and feel someone else's truth, there's a reclamation, and like it does seem unending in some sense. And I think that's one way, right? You can also sit in a cave for 40 years, or you can also you can do that. I think you can find that healing other ways too. For me, nature is where I go for my deepest healing. And but in this specific moment on the planet, I feel it's together is where we should turn first. Mm-hmm. And because I feel like, not only does that help us heal individually, but my sense is we have a lot of work to do, and we gotta get together on it. Like we have a lot of, we got a planet that we got to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And for me, I really resonate with the Gestalt psychology or Gestalt philosophy model, which is that the self emerges in community. And so we can go away and sit in a cave, but we are relational social animals, and the work must be embedded in community. And especially in this time where, our collaborative efforts are really what's necessary. And so if we can't show up with all of the golden jewels that we found sitting in the cave, we can't show up and bring them to the vulnerable space of being with another.
What I get really excited about is what if we poured the amount of resource that we've been pouring into, apps, poured into the human connective technology and expanding that. Oh man, that's it. That's it to me. That's like that's where we got to go.
Yeah. Well, I will plug a friend's app from Amsterdam, human.online. They're creating, during the first wave of lockdown, at least that was the timing here in Australia, platform where it's kind of like chat roulette, but you can't talk, and it's just a minute of silence with somebody whom you don't know. And it matches you up, and you just have this window where there's another human, and it's just a minute of silence.
Oh, that's so cool.
It is. So cool. And now they're creating the next version of the platform is like Insight Timer is for meditations and for your intrapsychic or intrapersonal practices. They're creating a similar platform, but for relational practices. And so when you have your minute of silence, you then can build your inner sanctum of trust by then friending people who you enjoyed that minute of silence with. And then with those people who you have a trusted relationship with, you can then go through the experiences that a facilitator will guide you through. Maybe it's breathing together, maybe it's transfiguration and eye gazing, maybe it's a loving kindness meditation, whatever it is. But you start to build these relational capacities, which I just absolutely love. So check that out. And I'm definitely going to place it in the show notes as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Well, as a way of parting, shall we, firstly, how do you prefer people to connect with you, or just the EVRYMAN website?
Yeah, everyman.com, EVRYMAN.com. My personal website is dan-doty.com. We're on Instagram and all the other spots. And the EVRYMAN podcast is mostly a weekly show. Another great place to get a touch point.
Mm-hmm. Great. And shall we check out then?
Yeah. Checking out, feeling far more awake, feeling connected, feeling still tired, but pleased and relaxed. For sure.
Great. And I'm checking out, feeling, excited, feeling, somewhat even more, it's a funny mix of feeling really light and soft in the inquiry, but also really fiery behind the questions and just this kind of joint contemplation that we've sat in and that continues. So I'm feeling really gentle in it, but also really fiery and passionate about it.
It's a good combo.
Yeah. So thank you so much for taking the time again. Hope we didn't wake you up too much before bed. And I look forward to continuing the work together and staying connected.
Cool. Thank you.
What questions are still whirring inside for you? What landed and rung loudly for you? Let's take a moment. Thank you for joining me for another life-affirming and enriching conversation, each one a light, a torch to guide us on our path to being in right relationship with ourselves, those we walk with, and the ecologies we are very much a part of. I trust this has gifted you something to place in your toolkit to support you in your journey and your leadership. Make sure to connect with me and leave any comments on my Facebook or Instagram page at @ljeffrey and check out the links in the show notes. This show is completely funded by listeners just like you, so if you feel generous and wish to be part of nourishing these inquiries that we're exploring together, you can leave a once-off donation or soon subscribe to my Patreon membership. Show notes, resources, and donations are all at www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, we can't rush our way back. Notice connections and tend to the sweet, sweet spaces between. Lots of love.